Have you ever thought that the walls of a house could speak if they needed a voice? For many, a new home symbolizes a new beginning. It's a place where happy memories are made, families are raised, and dreams are shaped. But for some, that vision is quickly overtaken by something much darker. Stories of haunted houses, buried secrets, and unexplained events fascinate us because they challenge what we consider safe. When we imagine the place that should be our refuge, we often think of macabre secrets or events that defy logic. However, the reality is that some homes have past so disturbing that it would be impossible to ignore them. And that's exactly what you're about to discover. In today's video, we'll explore 3 real-life horror stories from people who, upon moving into their new homes, found not only a new home, but also terrifying mysteries. We're not talking about urban legends or stories made up to scare you. These stories come directly from the accounts of those who have experienced the unexpected and, often, the inexplicable. First, you'll hear about a family who discovered a sinister secret hidden in the walls of the house they've just moved into. Next, I'll meet a young couple who, while seeking a quiet life in the suburbs, notice that their house never seems to sleep. Finally, we'll delve into the story of a man who stumbled upon a forbidden room in his new home, a place that perhaps should never have been opened. These stories go beyond momentary scares. They make us reflect on what it really means to know the place where we live. After all, what would you do if your perfect home started revealing secrets that no one has discovered before? Would you dare to stay? Or would you run away without looking back? Get ready to feel your spine tingle. Each story you'll hear today is more disturbing than the last. Surprising details, unexpected twists, and, most importantly, the idea that this could happen to anyone. Who knows, maybe even you. So, sit back, turn off the lights, and immerse yourself in a universe where the everyday and the supernatural collide. These stories will challenge everything you think you know about safety and normalcy. But remember, what you're hearing is not just fiction. The story you are about to hear begins with a Cardoso family, made up of Marcos, Carla, and their 2 young children, Lucas and Ana. They had just fulfilled their dream of buying their own home, leaving behind years of renting in small, noisy apartments. The new house was spacious, with a lovely garden and a price that seemed too good to be true. But, as they soon discovered, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Marcos remembers exactly the moment they first walked into the house. It smelled of fresh paint, and the real estate agent told us that the renovation had been done to make it look like new. It looked impeccable, but something didn't quite add up. It was as if the place was very quiet. Carla, on the other hand, felt at ease immediately. She imagined her children running around the yard and the family having dinner together in the spacious living room. For the first few days, everything went well. The move was tiring but rewarding. However, the first signs that something was wrong soon began to appear. During the first few nights, Carla began to hear sounds coming from the walls of the hallway that led to the bedrooms. It was a low sound, like a rustling or something dragging, but when Marcos went to check, he found nothing. Probably rats, he would say, trying to reassure her. But the frequency of the sounds increased, and Carla began to notice other strange details. The sound always stopped as soon as someone approached, and it seemed to come from a specific point on the wall. One day, Lucas, just 6 years old, came running into the living room, pale. "There's someone in my room," he said, almost out of breath. Marcos and Carla looked at each other, but when they checked the boy's room, there was no one there. Lucas insisted, "I saw a shadow coming out of the wall." Carla began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. When she tried to talk to Marcos about the sounds and the shadow, he would reassure her, but inside she also began to question whether something was wrong. One day, while cleaning the hallway, Carla noticed something peculiar. An area of the wall looked slightly different. The texture was uneven, as if there was an extra layer of paint or plaster. Intrigued, she called Marcos, who decided to knock on the wall. The hollow sound confirmed what he had feared. There was an empty space inside. They decided to open a hole to check. Using a hammer, Marcos began to break the plaster, and as the opening grew larger, a strong, unpleasant smell began to spread through the house. It was like something rotten, but more chemical, Carla later recalled. When the wall was completely opened, the couple were shocked. Inside, they found a small cavity containing strange objects: an antique doll with its eyes gouged out, burned candles, and what appeared to be a partially burned diary or notebook. The diary contained jumbled entries and repeated words such as guilt, regret, and they are here. Some of the pages were completely stained, making it impossible to read. But what Marcos managed to understand left the couple disturbed. It seemed to be the story of a person who had lived in that house and believed she was being haunted by something coming from the walls. That night, Carla had a vivid dream. A woman with disheveled hair and sunken eyes whispered in her ear, saying, "You need to get out of here before it's too late." Carla woke up screaming, and Marcos, who was trying to be rational, began to believe that something was really wrong. The couple decided to investigate the history of the house. They spoke to neighbors and discovered that the previous residents had moved out abruptly, without giving any explanation. One of the older neighbors mentioned something about a tragedy that had occurred years ago, but did not want to go into details. Persistent, Marcos and Carla went to the local registry office to look for records and discovered that the house had belonged, 20 years ago, to a woman named Laura, who lived a reclusive life and was known for practicing strange rituals. The diary, it seemed, was hers. That night, everything came to a head. While they were sleeping, a loud crash woke the family. Marcos ran into the hallway and found the lights flickering, while a deafening sound echoed through the house, as if something was scratching all the walls at once. Lucas and Anna were screaming, and Carla, petrified, kept saying, "She's here." The family spent the rest of the night in a hotel and never returned to the house. They sold the property quickly, without asking any questions. For them, it was better to forget what had happened than to search for answers they might never find. The next story takes you to the quiet suburbs of a small town, where young couple Julia and Ricardo have finally found their dream home. After years of living in rented apartments, they were eager to build a life together in a safe neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. The property seemed perfect: a friendly facade, airy rooms, and even an attic that Ricardo planned to transform into a space to relax. But what began as a dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Because in that house, the feeling of peace never lasted long. It was as if it had its own energy, something Julia described as a constant restlessness. The first night, Julia had trouble sleeping. It was a heavy, almost oppressive silence, as if the air was thick. At 3 a.m., she woke up startled by a low, rhythmic sound, like footsteps upstairs. Ricardo, sleepy, said that it must have been the sound of the house adjusting itself, something normal in older structures. But Julia knew that it didn't sound like a wooden creak. The next day, while cleaning the attic, Ricardo found something that intrigued him: a pair of children's shoes carefully positioned in a corner. They were old, leather, and covered in dust. He called Julia over, and she immediately felt a chill. "Who would leave these here?" she asked. Ricardo laughed, trying to ease the tension. "Maybe the ghost of a child is trying to welcome us." But, deep down, he also found it strange. As the weeks went by, the small disturbances began to intensify. Every night, around the same time, Julia and Ricardo would hear sounds coming from the attic: scratching, footsteps, and occasionally something that sounded like a ball bouncing. Ricardo went up to investigate several times, but never found anything out of place. The behavior of the electronics in the house also caught his attention. The lights flickered irregularly, and the kitchen radio would turn on by itself, always playing static. One day, while working from home, Julia noticed that the television downstairs was on. She went downstairs to turn it off, but when she entered the living room, it turned off by itself. These events made the couple wonder if there was something wrong with the house or if they were just tired of the recent changes. However, as the weeks passed, the feeling of unease grew. Julia began to have recurring dreams in which she was trapped in a dark room, unable to find her way out, while hearing a childish voice calling her name. Concerned, Julia decided to investigate the property's past. After talking to some neighbors, she discovered that the house had a peculiar history. Decades earlier, a family had lived there with 2 young children. One of the boys, named Tomas, mysteriously disappeared inside the house and was never found. The devastated family moved out shortly after, and the house sat empty for many years before being renovated and sold. This revelation shook Julia, but Ricardo remained skeptical. People love to make up stories to justify coincidences, he said. But deep down, he was also starting to feel uneasy. It all culminated in one particularly frightening night. Around 3 a.m., Ricardo woke up to the sound of laughter coming from downstairs. He thought he was dreaming, but then he heard Julia calling out to him, her voice trembling. "Can you hear that?" The 2 of them went downstairs together, and when they entered the living room, they froze. In the center of the room, the light from the hanging lamp wavered, dimly illuminating a rubber ball that was bouncing on its own. The air was cold, and Ricardo swore he heard a voice whispering something incomprehensible. When the ball stopped, the TV turned on by itself, showing static, but for a moment, they both thought they saw the image of a child in the corner of the screen. Ricardo turned off the set immediately and pulled Julia out of the house. The next day, the couple contacted a team specialized in paranormal phenomena. The investigators confirmed that there was a presence in the house, something connected to Tomas' disappearance. They suggested a spiritual cleansing or even moving, depending on what the couple was willing to face. Julia didn't want to take any chances. For her, the feeling of being watched and the unexplained events were unbearable. In less than a week, they put the house up for sale and moved into a temporary apartment. Even after they left, Julia had a hard time getting over what had happened. Ricardo, who was initially skeptical, also came to believe that there was something beyond what science could explain. They vowed never again to underestimate the signs of a house that never sleeps. This last story takes us to a small village in the countryside, where João, a single man in his 30s, decided to start a new life. After inheriting an old house from a distant uncle, he saw an opportunity to get away from the hustle and bustle of the big city and start over in a quiet place. The house was large, with a charming colonial style, and was located in a secluded area surrounded by forests. It was exactly what João wanted: silence and peace. But, as he would discover, the silence of the house hid dark secrets. Soon after moving in, João began to notice something strange about the architecture of the house. There was a hallway that seemed shorter than it should be, as if some space had been hidden. At one end was a door locked with a rusty padlock, and none of the keys he was given seemed to open that padlock. Curious, João decided to investigate. He asked locals if they knew anything about the house or its previous owner, but no one seemed to know much. Some simply mentioned that John's uncle was a reserved man who rarely received visitors and never allowed anyone into the locked room. For the first few weeks, John didn't pay much attention to the door. He was busy organizing the house and adjusting to his new routine. But at night, when everything was quiet, he began to hear sounds coming from behind that door. They were subtle noises, footsteps, murmurs, and occasionally a faint sound of something being dragged. At first, he thought he was imagining things, but over time, the sounds became more frequent and clearer. One night, John woke from a deep sleep to hear a loud noise. as if something had fallen inside the locked room. He ran to the door and noticed that the padlock seemed to have moved, as if someone had tried to force it. Determined to find answers, John began to rummage through the old belongings in the attic.
It was there that he found a diary that seemed to belong to his uncle.
As he leafed through it, he found disturbing accounts of the locked room. "I made a terrible mistake," one page read.
"Whatever is in there should not exist.
Never open the door, no matter what." In another entry, his uncle mentioned engaging in practices he described as experimental and dangerous. He believed that something had become trapped inside the room, something that did not belong in this world. These accounts made John uneasy. Despite the clear warning, his curiosity began to grow. He needed to know what was behind that door. After days of pondering, John decided to open the room. He bought tools to cut the padlock, and one stormy night, with lightning illuminating the house, he finally broke the lock. As he opened the door, a strong, unpleasant smell hit him. The room was dark, and the only furniture was a wooden chair in the center, surrounded by strange symbols drawn on the floor. The walls were covered in scratch marks, and John felt intensely cold, as if the temperature had dropped dramatically. As he examined the room, he found a box in the corner. Inside it were objects that seemed personal: a gold chain, an antique clock, and a photograph of a woman with a sad expression. But what caught his attention was a manuscript that looked like some kind of ritual or incantation. After opening the room, events in the house took a turn for the worse. Every night, John heard heavy footsteps walking down the hallway. Lights flickered, and doors opened and closed by themselves. Sometimes, he felt as if he were being watched, even though he was alone. One night, while sleeping, John woke up with the sensation of something pressing on his chest. He opened his eyes and saw a dark, shapeless figure hovering over him. He tried to scream, but his voice would not come out. When he finally managed to move, the figure disappeared. In desperation, John sought help from a local priest. The priest visited the house and performed a blessing, but he himself seemed restless. "There is something very wrong here," the priest said. He advised John to leave the house immediately. John tried to sell the house, but no buyer seemed interested. He eventually moved to an apartment in the city, leaving the house behind. However, he continued to be tormented by nightmares involving the room and the shadowy figure. To this day, the house remains abandoned, and no one dares to cross its threshold. What John found in that forbidden room remains a mystery, but he is certain of one thing: some doors are meant to remain closed forever. After exploring these three disturbing and real-life horror stories, one question remains: what can they teach us about the unknown? These stories are not just scary tales. They reflect our deepest fears and the emotions that emerge when faced with the unexplainable. Homes, by their very nature, are intimate and personal spaces, designed to protect and comfort. However, when something breaches that security, whether through paranormal events, hidden secrets, or past tragedies, what should be a haven becomes a place of horror. These stories highlight how a home can be both a sanctuary and a prison, depending on what is held within its walls. The Cardoso house showed how past traumas can literally seep into the present, making it impossible for new residents to ignore what happened there. The house that never sleeps exemplified how residual energies can linger, echoing events that have deeply affected that space. The forbidden room revealed the danger of curiosity when it collides with forces we do not understand. These stories connect us to a primal fear, the fear of the unknown. When something defies logic or challenges our perception of reality, we are forced to confront the idea that we may not be as in control as we would like to believe. In addition, the stories explore universal themes such as loss, regret, and the impact of human actions on the environment. In all of them, the characters face forces that, in some way, were a reflection of past choices or events. The big question these stories raise is, should we fear the supernatural or simply respect it?
Many cultures around the world believe that there are things we should not provoke or try to understand.
Just as John's uncle warned in his diary, there are doors that should not be opened. In a broader sense, this can be interpreted as a reminder that some truths, memories, or secrets are best left in the past.
Whether you are a skeptic or a believer in the supernatural, these stories remind us that houses carry stories, and some of those stories can be deeper, darker, and more disturbing than we might imagine.
So, next time you visit a new home or consider moving, pay attention to the signs, listen to your intuition, and, above all, never ignore what cannot be explained. After all, what is hidden may not always want to be found. These were just 3 stories. But who knows how many other hidden secrets are hidden out there? If you like this video and want more stories like these, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos, where we will bring more real and disturbing stories. And tell me here in the comments, have you ever experienced something inexplicable? This call to action is engaging, encourages audience interaction, and maintains the atmosphere of mystery and curiosity. If you need settings or want something more specific, just let me know.